On a cold February night in 1929, behind the gray limestone walls of the most expensive mansion ever built in California, 2 gunshots shattered the silence of Beverly Hills. Within hours, the bodies of 2 men would be discovered in a guest bedroom. Within days, the case would be closed. Within decades, the truth would be buried deeper than the oil wells that paid for every stone in that 46,000 square foot fortress. This is the story of Greystone Mansion. A story of wealth extracted from the earth, a story of political scandal that reached the highest offices in American government, and a story of 2 deaths that powerful men decided would never be properly investigated. The mansion still stands today. You can walk its grounds. You've seen its grand staircases in dozens of Hollywood films. But what you haven't seen is the blood that soaked into the Persian rugs of Room 27. Blood that belonged to Ned Doheny, heir to one of America's greatest oil fortunes, and blood that belonged to Hugh Plunkett, the trusted friend who allegedly pulled the trigger before turning the gun on himself. At least, that's what the official story claims. But the evidence tells a different tale, a tale of a crime scene tampered with before police arrived, of witnesses whose stories seemed rehearsed, of a gunshot wound that forensics experts say could not have been self-inflicted, and of a family so wealthy, so connected, so powerful that they could afford to buy silence from everyone who mattered. To understand what really happened on February 16, 1929, we need to go back to where this story truly begins. Not in the hallways of Greystone, but in the oil fields of Los Angeles and the political backrooms of Washington, D.C. We need to understand who Edward L. Doheny was, how he built his empire, and what he was willing to do to protect it. Because the deaths at Greystone weren't just a murder-suicide, they were the final chapter in one of the biggest political scandals in American history. Edward Lawrence Doheny arrived in Los Angeles in 1892 with nothing but ambition and a knowledge of mining. The city was different then. No sprawling suburbs, no Hollywood sign on the hills, just a sleepy town of 50,000 people built around old Spanish missions and agricultural land. But Doheny saw something others didn't. Walking near present-day Dodger Stadium, he noticed tar seeping from the ground. While others saw worthless black sludge, Doheny saw the future. He and his partner Charles Canfield scraped together their last $700 and started drilling. 700 feet down on November 4th, 1892, they struck oil. Not a massive gusher, but enough. 7 barrels a day. Within months, oil derricks sprouted across Los Angeles like metal forests. The city would never be the same. Doheny didn't stop at Los Angeles. He expanded south into Mexico, where environmental regulations were non-existent and labor was cheap. By 1901, his Mexican petroleum company was extracting millions of barrels from fields around Tampico. The oil flowed north, fueling the American economy's rapid expansion. The money flowed back to Doheny, building a fortune that would rival the Rockefellers. But wealth on that scale requires protection, and protection requires powerful friends. That's where the trouble started. In 1921, President Warren G. Harding appointed Albert Fall as Secretary of the Interior. Fall was an old friend of Doheny's, a fellow prospector from their mining days, the kind of friendship built on trust and mutual benefit. The kind that doesn't ask too many questions when favors are requested. Fall controlled something valuable. Government oil reserves set aside for the U.S. Navy, reserves at Elk Hills, California, and Teapot Dome, Wyoming. These weren't just any oil fields. They were strategic reserves, meant to ensure the Navy would always have fuel in times of war. By law, they were off limits to private exploitation. But laws can be bent when the right people are in power. In November 1921, Secretary Fall quietly transferred control of the naval oil reserves from the Navy Department to the Interior Department. Then, even more quietly, he began leasing those reserves to private companies. No competitive bidding. No public announcement, just backroom deals with old friends. Edward Doheny received drilling rights to Elk Hills. In exchange, he gave Fall a loan of $100,000 in cash. Not a check, not a bank transfer. Cash. Delivered in a little black bag by Ned Doheny, Edward's only son, to Fall's office in Washington. D.C. Harry Sinclair, another oil magnate, got the Teapot Dome lease. He was equally generous with Secretary Fall, providing hundreds of thousands in Liberty bonds and cash. For a while, the scheme worked perfectly. The oil companies extracted millions in profits. Fall received his payments. The Navy got storage facilities they claimed were part of the deal. Everyone who mattered was happy. But secrets buried in Wyoming soil have a way of surfacing. In 1922, a Wyoming oilman named Leslie Miller noticed something odd. Drilling activity at Teapot Dome, on land that was supposed to be preserved for military use. He contacted his senator, John Kendrick, who began asking questions. Those questions led to Senator Thomas Walsh of Montana launching a full investigation in 1923. Walsh was methodical, relentless, and incorruptible. As he dug deeper, the entire scheme unraveled. The secret leases, the $100,000 loan, the cozy relationship between government officials and oil barons. The scandal exploded across American newspapers. Teapot Dome became synonymous with government corruption. President Harding, already weakened by other scandals in his administration, died in August 1923 before the worst revelations came to light. Many historians believe the stress of the mounting scandals contributed to his sudden death. Albert Fall resigned in disgrace. He would eventually become the first cabinet secretary in American history to be convicted of a crime committed while in office, serving 9 months in prison. But Edward Doheny, he hired the best lawyers money could buy. He claimed the $100,000 was indeed a loan between old friends, nothing more. He said he expected to be repaid. He produced a promissory note that Ned had Fall sign. The courts bought it. In 1926, Doheny was acquitted of bribery charges. The jury decided that while Fall had clearly accepted a bribe, Doheny hadn't offered one, a legal impossibility that only makes sense when you understand the power of wealth in American courtrooms. But the damage was done. The Doheny name, once synonymous with entrepreneurial success, was now linked to corruption. Edward's oil empire was intact, his fortune secure, but his reputation was tarnished. The man who had built Los Angeles into an oil capital was now a symbol of everything wrong with American politics. And his son Ned? Ned had been right in the middle of it. It was Ned who delivered that black bag of cash to Fall's office, Ned who secured Fall's signature on the promissory note, Ned whose testimony could make or break his father's legal defense. The pressure on the young man must have been immense. Perhaps that's why, as 1928 turned to 1929, Edward Doheny decided his son needed a refuge, a place away from the scandal, a palace fit for a prince of the oil industry. He would call it Greystone. Construction began in 1927 on 18.3 acres of prime Beverly Hills real estate. Edward hired Gordon Kaufman, the architect who would later design the Hoover Dam, to create something unprecedented, not just a house, but a statement. A declaration that the Doheny family still stood among America's elite, scandal or no scandal. Kaufman designed a 55-room Tudor revival mansion built from Indiana limestone shipped across the country. The stone was gray, hence the name Greystone, but gray doesn't capture the majesty of what Kaufman created. The mansion sprawled across 46,000 square feet. It had formal gardens, terraced lawns, cascading fountains, and pools fed by natural springs. Inside, no expense was spared. Hand-carved oak staircases imported from England, bowling alleys in the basement, a movie theater because this was Hollywood after all, fireplaces tall enough to stand in, ceilings detailed with ornate plasterwork, floors of imported marble and rare woods. The cost? $3.1 million in 1928 money. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $50 million today. It was the most expensive private residence in California history. Edward gave it to Ned as a gift, a wedding present combined with a birthday gift, combined with everything a father could give a son to say, "I'm sorry for what you've been through. You deserve this." Ned Doheny moved into Greystone with his wife Lucy and their 5 children in September 1928. The family settled into their palatial new home, trying to build a life separate from the scandal that had consumed the previous years. But some shadows are too long to escape. Ned wasn't just an oil heir enjoying his father's wealth. He worked as an executive in the family's petroleum companies. He had genuine business acumen, having studied at the University of Southern California before joining the family enterprise. Those who knew him described a man trying to prove himself beyond his father's accomplishments, to be respected for his own abilities. But the Teapot Dome scandal had marked him. He had been called to testify multiple times. He had been cross-examined by prosecutors trying to crack his story about that $100,000 delivery. He had sat in courtrooms while lawyers questioned his integrity, his honesty, his role in one of America's biggest political scandals. The stress took its toll. Those close to Ned noticed changes, periods of depression, anxiety about the family name, difficulty sleeping. In 1928, these weren't called mental health issues. They were private struggles a man was expected to handle himself. Ned had one constant support through it all: Hugh Plunkett. Hugh was more than just Ned's personal secretary. The two had been friends since childhood. They'd gone to school together. Hugh had been there through Ned's marriage, the birth of his children, the construction of Greystone. When Ned needed someone to talk to, someone who understood the pressure, Hugh was there. Hugh also lived at Greystone. He had his own quarters in the mansion, not his family, but more than just an employee. He was 36 years old in February 1929, unmarried, dedicated to his position with the Doheny family. The exact nature of their relationship has been debated for decades. Some historical accounts suggest they were simply close friends. Others hint at something deeper. In 1920s America, certain relationships couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Powerful families had appearances to maintain. What we know for certain is this. On the evening of February 16, 1929, Ned and Hugh were together in guest bedroom number 27 on the east wing of Greystone Mansion. What happened in that room has never been fully explained. The official timeline, cobbled together from family statements and police reports, goes like this. Around 8 p.m., Ned and Hugh went to guest room 27. Why they chose a guest room instead of Ned's private quarters has never been adequately explained. The room was on the second floor, somewhat isolated from the main family areas. At approximately 8:30 p.m., two gunshots rang out through the limestone halls. The servants heard them. Lucy, Ned's wife, heard them. The children were in other parts of the massive house, hopefully far enough away to be spared the sound. But here's where the story gets strange. The police weren't called until 11:30 p.m. 3 hours after the shots were fired. 3 hours during which the crime scene was compromised, evidence was moved, and stories were coordinated. When Beverly Hills police finally arrived, they found both men dead in room 27. Hugh Plunkett was in a chair, a cigarette still smoldering in the ashtray beside him. He had been shot once in the back of the head. The bullet had entered from behind and exited through his forehead. The wound was catastrophic. Death would have been instantaneous. Ned Doheny lay on the floor nearby. He had been shot once in the head as well. A .38 caliber revolver lay near his body. The official determination came swiftly: murder-suicide. Hugh had shot Ned, then turned the gun on himself. Case closed. But the evidence didn't support that conclusion. In fact, the evidence raised more questions than it answered. First, the nature of Hugh's wound. He was shot in the back of the head while sitting in a chair, apparently in the middle of smoking a cigarette. The cigarette was still burning. He hadn't moved, hadn't turned, hadn't reacted. How does someone shoot themselves in the back of the head while sitting calmly in a chair? Forensic experts later pointed out the obvious. Hugh's wound was inconsistent with suicide. The angle was wrong. The position was impossible. If he had wanted to shoot himself, he would have put the gun to his temple, under his chin, in his mouth, not behind his head while seated. Second, the gun. The revolver found near Ned's body had no fingerprints on it. None. In an era before people routinely wiped down crime scenes from watching CSI, the absence of prints was suspicious. If Ned had grabbed the gun in a struggle, his prints should have been there. If Hugh had fired it, his prints should have been there. Instead, the gun was clean. Third, the 3-hour delay. Why did it take so long to call the police? The official explanation was that Lucy, upon hearing the shots, went to investigate. She found the bodies and immediately called the family doctor, who called Edward Doheny Sr., who drove from his downtown Los Angeles mansion to Greystone before anyone thought to notify the authorities. In those 3 hours, the doctor examined the bodies. The servants cleaned certain areas of the room. Ned's body was moved from where it had fallen. The family had time to compose themselves, to discuss what to say, to decide how to handle the scandal that was about to break. By the time the police arrived, any chance of a proper forensic investigation was gone. Fourth, the witnesses. When police questioned the household staff, their accounts were remarkably consistent. Too consistent. They used similar phrases, similar descriptions, similar timelines. It was as if they'd been coached on what to say. Lucy's statement was brief. She heard shots. She found the bodies. She called for help. She had no idea why Hugh would do such a thing. Ned had seemed fine earlier that evening. The servants echoed her story. Everything was normal. No arguments, no signs of distress. Just 2 shots, then silence. But neighbors reported something different. In the days before the shooting, they'd heard raised voices coming from Greystone. Arguments late at night. The sound of furniture being moved or thrown. The estate's thick walls usually kept the Doheny family's private business private, but something had been happening in those final days. The police, however, didn't push too hard. This was Beverly Hills in 1929. The Doheny family wasn't just wealthy, they were politically connected. Edward Doheny Sr. had survived the Teapot Dome scandal through a combination of excellent lawyers and powerful friends. Those same resources could make a criminal investigation very difficult. The Beverly Hills Police Department concluded their investigation within 48 hours. Murder-suicide. Hugh Plunkett had experienced some kind of mental breakdown. He shot Ned, then himself. No further questions. The coroner agreed. The district attorney declined to pursue the matter. Case closed. But the Catholic Church wasn't satisfied. Ned had been a devout Catholic. The Doheny family had donated millions to Catholic institutions across California. Edward had built churches, funded schools, supported monasteries. The family expected Ned to receive a full Catholic burial with all appropriate rites. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles said no. Church law was clear. Suicide was a mortal sin. Those who took their own lives could not receive Catholic burial in consecrated ground. If Ned had committed murder-suicide, as the official report claimed, he had damned his own soul. The church could not give him the funeral his family demanded. Edward Doheny was furious. He had built half the Catholic infrastructure in Southern California. He had been a Knight of Malta, a papal knight, one of the church's most generous benefactors. And now they were denying his son a proper burial? For weeks, the standoff continued. The family insisted Ned was innocent. The church pointed to the police report. Neither side would budge. Finally, a compromise was reached. The official story would be quietly revised. Not a murder-suicide, a tragic accident. Hugh had been showing Ned a gun. It had gone off, killing Ned. In his grief and shock, Hugh had then taken his own life. It was a ridiculous story that explained nothing, but it gave the church enough cover to grant Ned a Catholic burial. On February 20th, 1929, Ned Doheny was laid to rest at Calvary Cemetery in East Los Angeles. Thousands attended the funeral. The family held their heads high. The scandal, they hoped, would fade. Hugh Plunkett received no such ceremony. His family quietly buried him with minimal fanfare. In death, as in life, he remained in Ned's shadow. But the questions didn't fade. They multiplied. In the decades since 1929, investigators, journalists, and historians have proposed alternative theories, because the evidence simply doesn't support the official story. Theory 1, Hugh did kill Ned, but it wasn't suicide. It was murder, pure and simple. Perhaps they'd had a relationship that Ned wanted to end. Perhaps Hugh knew secrets about the Teapot Dome scandal that made him dangerous. Perhaps he'd been blackmailing the family and Ned confronted him. After shooting Ned, Hugh panicked. But before he could flee or figure out what to do next, someone else arrived. Someone who shot Hugh in the back of the head while he sat in shock. Someone who then wiped down the gun, arranged the scene to look like mutual suicide, and left. That someone would have been a family member or trusted associate. Someone who had access to Greystone. Someone who could ensure the servants stayed quiet and the police investigation stayed shallow. This theory explains the impossible angle of Hugh's wound. It explains the cleaned gun. It explains the 3-hour delay. The family needed time to stage the scene and coordinate their stories. Theory 2, neither man pulled the trigger. Both were murdered by a third party. Perhaps Ned knew too much about his father's business dealings. The Teapot Dome scandal was officially over, but there were other questionable transactions in the Doheny Empire. Operations in Mexico where labor activists were silenced, deals with corrupt officials that couldn't stand scrutiny. Ned, with his conscience bothering him, might have considered going public. Hugh, as Ned's closest confidant, would have known everything Ned knew. That made him equally dangerous. A professional hitman could have entered Greystone that night, shot both men, arranged the scene, and disappeared while the family decided how to handle it. The Doheny family had the resources to hire such services. They had the connections to corrupt officials who could ensure no real investigation took place. And they had the motivation, protecting the empire Edward had built over 40 years. Theory 3, it was exactly what the revised story claimed, a tragic accident. Hugh was showing Ned a gun. It discharged, killing Ned. Hugh, devastated, turned the weapon on himself. This theory has the fewest adherents because it explains the least. The forensic evidence, the clean gun, the 3-hour delay, the coached witnesses. All of it points to something more sinister than an accident. But accidents do happen, and wealthy families do cover up embarrassing circumstances. Maybe the truth is simpler than conspiracy. We'll likely never know with certainty. Everyone who was there that night is long dead. The police files, such as they were, are incomplete. The family has maintained silence for nearly a century. The Catholic Church buried its doubts along with Ned's body. What we do know is this. 2 men died violently at Greystone, and the truth died with them. Edward Doheny Sr. never fully recovered from his son's death. He continued running his oil empire, but the spark was gone. He'd built Greystone as a gift for Ned, a palace for his heir to raise the next generation of Dohenys. Now it was just a monument to loss. Lucy and the children continued living at Greystone for a few years, but the mansion had too many ghosts. They eventually moved out. Edward Sr. died in 1935 at age 79, one of the wealthiest men in America, but broken by scandal and grief. Lucy later remarried and lived until 1993, carrying whatever secrets she knew to her grave. She never spoke publicly about that February night. The Doheny family sold Greystone to the city of Beverly Hills in 1965 for $2.8 million, less than it cost to build. The city turned the grounds into a public park. The mansion itself became a popular filming location. If you've watched movies or television in the past 60 years, you've seen Greystone. The mansion has appeared in hundreds of productions. The grand staircase where Norma Desmond descended in Sunset Boulevard, that's Greystone. The mansion in The Big Lebowski, Greystone. Scenes from Spider-Man, X-Men, The Bodyguard, There Will Be Blood, and countless others. All filmed at Greystone. Hollywood loves the mansion. The architecture is stunning, the grounds are immaculate, and there's something intangible, something gothic about the place that cameras capture perfectly. But film crews working late shifts report odd experiences. Footsteps in empty hallways, doors that close themselves. Cold spots in certain rooms, particularly on the second floor east wing. Room 27, where Ned and Hugh died, is part of the private areas not open to public tours. But those who've been inside describe an oppressive feeling, a weight in the air. Are these stories just Hollywood legends? Probably. Old mansions creak, isolation creates imagination, and knowing a place's dark history makes people see shadows that aren't there, but the legends persist. Some security guards refuse to work alone at night. Some tour guides avoid certain hallways. And every year, as February 16th approaches, local paranormal enthusiasts gather outside the gates, hoping to catch some evidence of spirits who can't rest. The real ghosts of Greystone, though, aren't supernatural. Their questions never answered. Justice never served. Truth buried beneath layers of money and power. What really happened in Room 27? Who pulled the trigger? Was it murder, suicide, accident, or something else entirely? The Beverly Hills Police Department says the case is closed. The Doheny family descendants, scattered and distanced from the oil empire now, have nothing to add. The mansion itself keeps its secrets locked in limestone walls. But there's a broader question worth asking. A question about the cost of empire. Edward Doheny built his fortune on oil extracted from California and Mexico. The Los Angeles oil boom created thousands of jobs, yes. It fueled America's rise as an industrial power, yes. But at what price? The Mexican oil workers who toiled in Tampico fields under brutal conditions, they paid a price. The political system corrupted by secret deals and bags of cash, it paid a price. The environment scarred by early drilling techniques with no environmental oversight, it paid a price. And Ned Doheny, who never asked to be born into oil royalty, who carried his father's legal troubles and public shame, who died violently at age 35 in a mansion built with tainted money, he paid the ultimate price. Hugh Plunkett, whatever his role that night, paid the same. Their deaths solved nothing. The Doheny fortune persisted for another generation before dispersing. The oil continued flowing from California fields until they ran dry. The Teapot Dome scandal became a historical footnote, a trivia question about the Harding administration. Greystone stands as a monument to all of it, the ambition, the wealth, the corruption, the violence, the unanswered questions. You can visit today. The grounds are open to the public during daylight hours. You can walk the gardens where Ned's children once played. You can see the exterior of the mansion, that gray limestone facade that looked so imposing in 1928 and still impresses today. You can't go inside Room 27. That part of the mansion isn't on the public tour. But you can stand outside and look up at the windows of the East Wing second floor. You can imagine two men in that room on a cold February night, one sitting with a cigarette, one standing nearby. You can imagine the sound of gunshots echoing through 46,000 square feet of luxury. And you can ask yourself, what really happened? The official story is murder-suicide. Hugh shot Ned, then himself. The Beverly Hills police said so. The family accepted it, after negotiating with the Catholic Church about funeral rites. The case was closed 95 years ago. But the evidence tells a different story. The impossible wound, the clean gun, the 3-hour delay, the coached witnesses. The powerful family with everything to lose if the truth came out. Someone knows what happened in Room 27, or someone did before they died. Maybe it was exactly as reported, tragic and senseless. Maybe it was something darker, a murder covered up by money and influence. We'll never know for certain. That's the real curse of Greystone. Not ghosts in the hallways, but truth buried so deep it can never be recovered. The mansion will stand for decades more, probably centuries. The limestone is solid. The construction was built to last. Future generations will tour the grounds, film movies in the ballrooms, get married in the gardens. But they'll never know the full story of February 16th, 1929. They'll never know if Ned Doheny was murdered or took his own life after murdering his friend. They'll never know if Hugh Plunkett was a victim or a killer. They'll never know if some third party escaped justice because the family was too powerful to investigate properly. All they'll know is that 2 men died violently in America's most expensive mansion, and nobody paid the price. That's the real scandal. Not what happened in Room 27, but what happened afterward. The quick investigation, the coached witnesses, the cleaned crime scene, the pressure on authorities to close the case without asking difficult questions. The Teapot Dome scandal proved that oil money could corrupt the highest levels of American government. The Greystone deaths proved that same money could corrupt justice itself. Edward Doheny beat the bribery charges in court. He never served a day in prison for the $100,000 loan that sent his friend Albert Fall to jail. He had the best lawyers, the best connections, the deepest pockets. And when his son died under suspicious circumstances, he had the power to ensure no real investigation threatened the family name. That's what unlimited wealth buys in America, not just mansions and luxury, but protection from consequences, immunity from justice, the power to write your own truth and force everyone else to accept it. Greystone Mansion stands as a monument to that power. 55 rooms of privilege, 46,000 square feet of immunity. $3.1 million worth of protection from accountability. The tourists who visit see beautiful architecture. Film crews see perfect locations. Paranormal enthusiasts see haunted hallways. But look deeper. Look past the hand-carved staircases and imported marble. Look past the terraced gardens and cascading fountains. Look at the gray limestone walls and ask, how many secrets are buried in those stones? How many workers were exploited to extract the oil that paid for this mansion? How many Mexican laborers died in the Tampico fields under conditions no American worker would tolerate? How many politicians took bribes to look the other way while public resources were stolen? How many questions went unasked because asking them would anger powerful men? And ultimately, how many crimes went unsolved because money bought silence? 2 men died at Greystone on February 16, 1929. Their deaths have never been satisfactorily explained. The evidence suggests foul play. The investigation was deliberately shallow. The truth was buried along with the bodies. That's not a ghost story, that's American history. Edward Doheny discovered oil in Los Angeles in 1892. In 37 years, he built one of America's great fortunes. He constructed the mansion to prove his family belonged among the nation's elite, scandal or no scandal. 5 months after moving in, his only son was dead. The empire Edward built outlasted him by a generation, then fragmented. The Mexican oil fields were nationalized in 1938. The California wells eventually ran dry. The family name faded from prominence, but Greystone remains. A limestone reminder of a particular moment in American history when oil barons were kings, when political corruption was business as usual, and when money could bury any truth. The mansion is beautiful. The grounds are immaculate. The architecture is stunning, and somewhere in room 27 the truth still waits, waiting for someone to ask the right questions, waiting for someone to demand real answers, waiting for justice that may never come, because the men who could provide justice are as dead as the men who needed it. The witnesses are gone. The evidence is compromised. The case is closed. All that remains are the gray stones that give the mansion its name, stones that have seen everything, stones that will never speak. In the end, maybe that's the most fitting monument to the Doheny Empire, a mansion of secrets, a palace of unanswered questions, a fortress where truth goes to die. You can visit Greystone today, walk the grounds, take photos of the architecture. Imagine the lives lived behind those limestone walls. But remember, as you walk those paths, 2 men died here, violently, mysteriously, and someone got away with it. Whether that someone was Hugh Plunkett, who the official story blamed, or Ned Doheny, who the revised story blamed, or a third party who was never named, never investigated, never held accountable, or the system itself, corrupted by oil money and political power, that decided some crimes are better left unsolved when the victims belong to powerful families. The truth is buried at Greystone, buried deeper than the oil wells, buried beneath 95 years of silence. And there it will stay. A secret kept by gray stones, a mystery preserved by power, a crime that money decided would never be solved. That's the legacy of Edward Doheny's greatest gift to his son. Not a mansion, but a tomb. A beautiful, expensive, impenetrable tomb where truth and justice were buried alive. The unsolved double homicide at Hollywood's most famous mansion, Greystone.